Progress is always towards something, in the service of someone. To progress is to move in some definite direction. The way society progresses, the shape technological innovation takes, is never neutral. Enter Trump's big, beautiful bill, in which we find a provision that spells out the direction not only the US but the world is taking. Like the Industrial Revolution, today's great advancements, prominently in AI, are being used to disempower and break down community, identity, reads the BBB. In general, no state or political subdivision thereof may enforce, during a 10-year period, any law or regulation limiting, restricting, or otherwise regulating artificial intelligence models, AI systems, or automated decision systems entered into interstate commerce. End quote. This means resistance to the rights of states and smaller administrations to use the law as an aid to tailor AI to local needs, experimenting with it, was being preemptively neutralized. Thankfully, this provision was rejected by the Senate and does not appear in the final version of the bill. However, America's AI Action Plan, published July 23rd, tries to get around that. Quote, "The federal government should not allow AI-related federal funding to be directed towards states with burdensome AI regulations that waste these funds." End quote. It adds that such should not interfere with state rights, and elsewhere talks about not benefiting incumbents to the AI sector unfairly, but this suggests a mechanism to disincentivize state-level regulatory efforts. In fact, the Office of Management and Budget, OMB, and federal agencies are directed in the plan to, quote, "limit funding if the state's AI regulatory regimes may hinder the effectiveness of that funding," end quote. The point isn't just to strengthen the federal government, but to partner with established large companies per Trump's Stargate project, a joint venture created with OpenAI, SoftBank, Oracle, and investment firm MGX. Much of America's AI action plan is reasonable, in fact, but we should understand it in the context of the initial intention to stop all state-level regulation and the fusion of Washington with big tech in broader terms that's taking place. Around the time the Big Beautiful Bill was unveiled, we had the LA riots leveraged to justify integrating predictive and biometric AI into domestic law enforcement. After her meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, for example, influencer Laura Loomer was tweeting about how satisfying it would be to get Palantir working on identifying illegals. Going forward, we can expect a host of problems to be presented to the public as intractable without AI, even ones whose solution would seem a matter of common sense, albeit requiring a modicum of political will. Sticking with Palantir, this company has plenty of US military contracts, prominently the Maven Smart System contract recently, and is deeply enmeshed in, for example, the Israeli military. Its use in law enforcement blurs the line, therefore, between army and police. That blurring of the line between law enforcement and military, the militarizing of law enforcement, is a defining feature of recent decades in Europe as well. OpenAI is likewise now increasingly a part of military infrastructure as well as civilian administration. We're witnessing the rise of Silicon Washington. But Palantir in particular seems to be the designated organ for managing centralized access to citizen data. This is concerning, not least because its CEO, Alex Karp, has expressed the desire to humiliate and ruin his enemies.
It's the most effective way for social changes. Humiliate your enemy and make them poorer.
He has a very definite agenda.
We built PG, which single-handedly stopped the rise of the far right in Europe. Foundry, which was used to distribute the COVID vaccine. And then the market is the Palantir market.
The name Palantir is actually significant. It's from Lord of the Rings, which, whether you're a fan or not, is one of our principal modern mythologies. And in Tolkien's etymology, Palantir means far-seeing, which isn't bad in itself, but could be equivalent to Panopticon, all-seeing. The Palantir itself is a smooth, dark surface, like a scrying glass in occultism, that allows users to see far-off events, places, people, and to communicate with others. But the visions they procure can be manipulated or limited in ways that distort what the user understands from them. Palantirs drive some characters mad and can be used for spying. In this way, they further the ambitions of Saruman in pursuing his vision of industrial dystopia. The Palantir Company's Gotham service seems likewise dystopianly named. Crucially, seeing everything is impossible, so to see everything has to mean to render everything visible, meaning to break down walls, to mesh together spaces that have their own logic, to transgress privacy, to make society legible, simple, a pure standing at reserve, as Heidegger would put it, that you can peer into, naked. That's what we're facing. Our real-life Palantir is a sort of privatized intelligence agency set up with CIA In-Q-Tel funding that has come home to reintegrate with the state, per Karp's vision in the Technological Republic. And it was Elon Musk who opened that door when the Department of Government Efficiency enlisted Palantir to develop a centralized mega API, application program interface, for accessing IRS data, including taxpayer information. The project has thankfully faced quite a bit of scrutiny, but it does align with wider policy direction. There's the 2021 National Security Commission on AI final report, which argues for concentrating AI ownership. A concentrated user base means more concentrated data, means better models, means more predictive power, means more competitiveness against, for example, China, and if we read between the lines, more ability to control the population, to impose top-down social cohesion. I've talked about that and Alex Karp in another video. More specifically, in enlisting Palantir, Doge was acting on the basis of a March 2025 executive order to eliminate data silos and give federal government unfettered access, quote, to information. The Trump White House stealthily replaced fight the deep state with fight government inefficiency with centralize and achieve full spectrum data access. This is the kind of sleight of hand that's taken place. And no walls, no defense may be erected in the face of this top-down implementation. We have a fairly close precedent in the Industrial Revolution, or preceding phase, in British history with the Enclosure Acts of the mid-18th century to the mid-19th century, which forced rural people into cities to work in new industrial factories rather than allowing them to experiment with how the new productive technology of industry might be adapted to their communities and how they might be able to reproduce economies of scale through networks and so forth. Local courts or village assemblies had some authority over common land use, grazing rights, and crop rotation, etc. The enclosures, especially the 1801 General Enclosure Act, for example, centralized decision-making in Parliament so that smaller communities could not block them or regulate land use for industrial purposes once privatized. We can also cite how the Combination Acts limited worker action, or how the Municipal Corporation Act of 1835 replaced local boroughs. The shape industrial technology took required that local communities not be allowed to interfere with policy. More than this, the ethos animating the rise of centralized industry was often quite sinister, as Scottish business theorist and polymath Andrew Ure wrote, quote, "The more self-willed the worker is, the less fit a component of a mechanical system. It's therefore best to eliminate tasks requiring, quote, peculiar dexterity and steadiness of hand, in favor of a mechanism so self-regulating that a child may superintend it," end quote. Two more telling sources of this mentality, which I've cited in an essay in the past, are the 1799 General View of the Agriculture of the County of Lincoln by Arthur Young, which reads, quote, "Everyone but an idiot knows that the lower classes must be kept poor, or they will never be industrious," end quote. And from the Commercial and Agricultural magazine published in 1800, quote, "In permitting the laboring man to acquire a certain portion of land, moderation must be observed, or we may chance to transform the laborer into a petty farmer, the most useless of all the applications of industry. When a laborer becomes possessed of more land, the farmer can no longer depend on him for constant work, and the haymaking and harvest must suffer to a degree which would prove a national inconvenience," end quote. These sources explicitly lay out the idea that you cannot allow people to own productive resources, like land. Otherwise, they just won't serve your ends, the ends of industry. The very same idea according to which people and communities should not own their own productive resources is at play in the Big Beautiful Bill and National Security Commission on AI final report. Everyone should get on the same platforms, the same factory floor, so to speak. We aren't now, however, being disempowered, barred from ownership of productive capital, that we might work in the traditional sense of employment, as in those British sources, but that we might serve as data producers for the algorithm, and beyond that, so that we might be politically neutralized. The point is to put AI outside the scope of the political imagination, to make sure it gets used in the right way by the right people at the top. Of course, centralization can be good, often is, but in general, the rule should be to allow subnational units to handle their own affairs to the degree that they are capable and do not degrade wider relations. In particular, when it comes to integrating new technology, allowing a high degree of local experimentation is akin to letting the body's organs metabolize food rather than feeding them to some external entity. Technology should be integrated, not integrated into. The tool has to be a tool. It shouldn't instrumentalize us. This means integrating AI according to the principle of subsidiarity, as it's sometimes called, distributism, local needs. AI algorithms developed by a supercomputer, for example, which is able to crunch huge amounts of data, can then be adapted to national and personal needs running on local hardware, even offline, but always open source so that it's auditable. And that needs to be explicitly brought to the public as part of a radical platform that directly confronts the establishment and problematizes the way AI is being developed and implemented. We have to refuse the Palantir. Okay, I just thought it'd be interesting to point out the way in which the Industrial Revolution and the current moment in history follow a similar pattern of making sure that local community cannot interfere. As always, thank you very much for watching. Subscribe to my Substack. You can be a paid member there. You can become a member of this YouTube channel. You can join me on Twitter, etc., etc. Please subscribe if you would like to, and until next time.